Hello beautiful people, my name is Bridget and welcome back to my channel. Hope you're having an awesome day. And today's video is going to be a video on palettes because we all love palettes. But today we're talking about palettes that have like a cult following and why I think that is. So today I'm going to talk about palettes that people are like dying over. A lot of these are limited edition and gone, so they're like cult classics, like, oh my gosh, do you have that from back in the day? I love that. I would never get rid of that kind of thing, and people rebuying years later and things that are also permanent that people still rave about. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started talking about some of these palettes. Alright guys, as always, all makeup on this channel is cruelty free, so are the palettes I'm talking about in today's video. Now, let's start off with a controversial brand because when I think of palettes that have a cult following, it is Kat Von D palettes. And only some of them. It's very particular on which ones. So I have 3 Kat Von D palettes that I think have a really good cult following right now. And let me zoom out so you can see the palettes and not my face all the time. There we go. So the first one is the Kat Von D Vida Loca palette. This probably has the most of a cult following. And then like almost all of these. I think there's one that might have more of a, like a thing about it. But the Vida Loca palette by Kat Von D, I've owned this. I did a video on it, like, is it worth all the hype around it? And I say that the palette is beautiful for being how old it is. Like back in the day when this came out, it's very revolutionary. It's like one of those first like rainbow palettes that really stand out in my mind that came out. I think the packaging is stunning. Everything, the artwork is beautiful. The color scheme is lovely. It just didn't age as well. So I feel like if you're really stuck on this palette, it's something you've wanted for years, it's not really worth it anymore because it just doesn't age as well. Powder products last for way longer than their expiration date just because they're powder. You can take out the top layer, have fresh stuff underneath. But for me, it just didn't age that well. It's an okay palette still, but it's definitely not worth the hype anymore. But I feel like when it came out, it makes sense that there was so much hype around it. There's still people like churning and swirling and dying over this palette and want to get their hands on it still to this day. But for me, it's just like, it didn't age as well, but it is beautiful. Like the artwork on that is beautiful. The color story in that palette, even if you just hung the palette up as a piece of art, the box, the cover, and the palette itself, it's stunning to look at. It just doesn't perform as well as some other palettes these days. The next palette is one that I recently decluttered last week, and this is the Kat Von D Pastel Goth palette. Yeah. Okay, so the Pastel Goth is beautiful, and I held onto it for a really long time. I'm one of those people who bought it after it came out. I got it like 2 years after it came out, and I held on to it for a long time. It is stunning. The colors in there still really perform beautifully. I decluttered it because it's just not a color scheme that I reach for very often. I don't use those colors very often. The palette still performs very nicely. It is slightly more powdery than some other formulas we have nowadays, but it's all beautiful colors and they're all mattes, which is really nice as well. I think this palette has a cult following because it was talked about when it first came out, but it didn't get as much hype as some of her other launches had in the past. So I feel like it was really just kind of swept under the rug to a degree because right after this palette came out, another Kat Von D palette came out right behind it and kind of stole its thunder. But for people who want a nice matte pastel palette, this is one of those things you don't see too often. I think that's why it has a cult following. I think it is true though that when you get pastels in a palette, they're usually shimmers. So that might also have something to do with it because these were matte. Next up from Kat Von D is the Saint and Sinner palettes. Oh my gosh, this 100% it has a cult following for the beautiful packaging. It's kind of like a cathedral. It has like a magnetic closure and like a little, it's beautiful. The color scheme on the inside is very wacky. It's kind of like all over the place. The color scheme is very bizarre to me, but the packaging is absolutely stunning. It feels luxurious in your hands. It's a really beautiful palette, and I think that's what it is a lot of Kat Von D palettes, like the Vida Loca as well as the Saint and Sinner palette. I think it's the packaging that really gets everyone in. The color scheme in the Pastel Goth and the color scheme in the Vida Loca have something to do with it, but Saint and Sinner, I 100% think it has something to do with that packaging because it's stunning. But it's awkward to store. Next up, I think a lot of you guys are going to think about this one and be like, oh yeah, I forgot, that definitely has a cult following. People get mad when people declutter this. I decluttered it like last year and I heard some stuff about it. So this is the Urban Decay Electric palette. There is like petitions online to bring this thing back. It did not sell very well when it came out. I bought it from Nordstrom Rack because honestly, people didn't buy it that much. It was not a time when it came out of people wanting neon bright fun colors, but the Urban Decay Electric palette has some of the most pigmented colors in there. A lot of them are mattes and they're stunning. People love this palette. The packaging's cool and everything. I feel like it's a little bit big packaging for the amount of colors you get inside. I think you get 8 shades inside the palette. People love the Urban Decay Electric palette. They always have like one signature shade that they love in the palette. It's different for everybody, but a lot of people like the pinks and stuff or the greens, and they like die for the palette over that one shade. It's always something like that. There's always, when people like fawn over the electric palette, they always have that one shade they talk about. So I don't know what it is for you. If you're absolutely in love with the palette, I would love to know, but people love the Urban Decay electric palette and want it to come back as permanent. Okay, so next up is the original Naked palette by Urban Decay. Now I feel like this mostly has a cult following because one, it's being discontinued. I think it discontinued last year. There was like a funeral for it. And two, this was a lot of people's first high-end eyeshadow palette, so people have a lot of strong connections to this palette. It's a $49 palette. It's just nudes, but for when it first came out, people were like all over this. They're like, it's high-end, it's nudes, it's colors they can wear every day. A lot of people hit pan on these shades, and I feel like that has something to do with the cult following this original Naked palette has, because a lot of people used to use it to death when it was their first palette. When makeup wasn't such a thing where it's like, I have to have everything, there's a million things coming out every week. This is one of those things that had its own moment when it came out and people really enjoyed, so I feel like that's why it has such a cult following. I feel like I'm talking fast and I'm speeding through this video. I don't know why. Okay, so the next one is one I have and I fawned over forever, and I love, and I don't see myself getting rid of, and you can't take it from me. So this is the Colored Raine Queen of Hearts palette. I never reached for this palette, if I'm being honest. Ever. But oh my gosh, the hype around this palette when it came out and it was limited edition. Now we know a lot of brands do this where it was limited edition, then it's permanent, like yay, get it now. This really was limited edition for like a year at least before it came back, and this palette is so dreamy. Like the sleeve of the palette, I did part ways with the sleeve of the palette just because I don't like keeping things in the sleeves if they're just a regular palette, but it was such beautiful artwork on it. The color scheme on the inside of the palette is stunning. The shimmery metallic shades in that palette are so buttery and creamy and beautiful. The mattes in there perform very nicely as well, like they're really nice mattes. It's just such a good palette. The quality is so beautiful, but I really think because this is one of those standout knockout warm tone palettes, when this came out, warm tones were so in. I feel like that's really what sold it. And it's just beautiful. Like the quality of this palette is so good. But it's really big and long and bulky. I think that's why I don't reach for it that often. But it's a good quality palette. I'm part of the problem with this cult following on this one because it is so good. Alrighty, next up is the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette. I had this and I decluttered it. You'll notice the theme here. I declutter a lot of stuff. If I don't use it, I tend to don't keep it. Except for the Colored Raine Queen of Hearts palette because like it's my baby. But the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette, this specifically has a cult following because the packaging is so unique, and it was one of those palettes that like you look at it and you're like, oh my god, it's beautiful. And it's still a really, really popular palette. Like this palette doesn't really go on sale that often because they're still selling so many of them. But the palette quality of this is really good, especially compared to their chocolate bar and the chocolate bonbon and like the white chocolate chip mini one. They're kind of dry. Something about the chocolate gold has so many metallic-y shades in there that are so soft, buttery, and easy to use. They're very, very pigmented colors. The golds, the greens in that palette, they're stunning to work with. They blend so buttery over the lid. Something about the quality of Too Faced palettes are hit and miss. I have one that I love, and it's the Too Faced Gingerbread Spice palette. They have an extra spicy now that I think I need, but I haven't bought because, like, money. But something about hit and miss palettes, like you have the White Peach palette by Too Faced that is absolute garbage. So it's a hit or miss thing with Too Faced, but with the Chocolate Gold palette, people fawn over this, specifically for these shimmery metallic-y shades. The mattes in there are about average, they're pretty decent, but the shimmery metallic shades and the beautiful gold dripping packaging really sells the Chocolate Gold palette. I almost said chocolate chip palette. Do they have a regular chocolate chip palette? I don't think so. They have like a white chocolate chip palette, but do they have a chocolate chip palette? Let me know, because I don't think they do. Next up is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. This is a permanent palette just like the Chocolate Gold from Too Faced. You can get this still all the time, but people love the Modern Renaissance palette. I just decluttered it along with the Soft Glam They're both really stunning, and I was looking at the Black Friday sales, and they have like this vault with both in there for $49. I'm like, that's like getting a free palette, but I just decluttered them, so I don't need them. But the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette, again, like the colored Raine palette, Queen of Hearts palette, these were really popular warm tone palettes when they came out. Like, warm tones were in when these two were released. And this palette still has a beautiful cult following because every influencer in the world hyped these to death and back, and then they died again, and they went back to the grave, and someone dug them up and stole their body to keep talking about this palette. And I am guilty of this because I love this palette. The quality is so good. One of the two of the colors is like a little dusty, and then one of the shimmers is a little chunky. It's Vermeer. I still love that color, but it's a little chunky. These have so much kickback in the pan that I feel like if this palette came out today, it was launched today, there would be a lot of criticism about it. The palette quality is still so pigmented and so beautiful. They blend out very nicely. The metallics and the mattes are both beautiful quality shadows, but I do feel like if this came out today, it'd be a little bit more criticized because there's just so much fallout in the pan. I feel like Anastasia Beverly Hills palette quality, kind of expect a lot of kickback in the pan, but it's just a lot with the Modern Renaissance. The palette is still beautiful, and I still really love it, and so does everyone else, because this palette has a following. And when you part ways with the Modern Renaissance, people think you're going to replace it with the newer one because yours is kind of old, but it's not always the case. It's just beautiful, and warm tones aren't really everyone's thing anymore. They were back in the day, especially when like that palette came out, and then after that it was really like the Naked Heat palette that had like the warm tone track going, the Blood Sugar palette as well. These are palettes that kept like the warm tone train going, but lately you don't see too many warm tone palettes that are really like smacking people in the face on the market, like, you know, really hyped. I don't know, let me know if I'm wrong about that. And lastly is another Anastasia Beverly Hills palette, and you think I'm going to say Soft Glam. But no, I am talking about the Anastasia Beverly Hills and Mario palette. This is an old palette. I also had this one because I was trying to collect on the Anastasia Beverly Hills shadows at one point, like all the palettes. That was dumb, so now I literally don't have any Anastasia palettes. I don't see the point in hoarding all these palettes. I'm not going to use them. Like, it sounds great to have the collection of palettes, and then I'm like, and Anastasia released this so much lately I couldn't keep up anyways, but the Anastasia Beverly Hills and Mario palette, this is like the first palette that came out from them that was like, this is a professional palette. The color scheme is really cool. I kind of like the workable colors. These are definitely like everyday colors. You can wear to work, you can wear out. It's a very versatile palette, but it's very boring, especially by today's standards. It's very boring. I feel like that's something you see a lot with the Mario collections because professionals use a lot of neutral colors, and that's perfectly fine. But nowadays when they release a palette, there's like a pop of something. It's like neutrals and a pop of blue or something like that. This one definitely was like mostly mattes, a really beautiful palette that a lot of people still love, and I've seen this in a lot of project pans. It's like the Mario palette. I do think it is a little bit powdery, but people love this palette because it's like the first like, ooh, Mario professional makeup artist palette with Anastasia Beverly Hills, which is a big name, and this is one of those times where they're still doing mostly brow products. They weren't really into palettes as much, but now they're like throwing stuff at you left and right. They're all over the place. But regardless, I feel like the Anastasia Beverly Hills and Mario palette has a beautiful, beautiful people cult following. I don't want to be like an avid, rabid, vicious cult following. That sounds bad. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Please let me know a palette that you think has a cult following down below that I missed. These are just things I thought off the top of my head that have like a really good like following of people who love these things still, even though they've been out for a while, and things that people will not part ways with or get upset if they see someone else declutter it. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next video. Please let me know what you think down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys!